it requires the switch to be lifted before moving. There are guarded brackets to prevent accidental movement. So how can this suddenly drop down if there was no manual intervention and both pilots are saying, I didn't touch it? So this is what it is. Now have a look at this. So this is the run and cut off. This is the fuel control. This is run and this is cut off. So there is a manual intervention that needs to happen. That's what experts are saying, and that's what the information that we have gleaned. And look at this. There are protection brackets on both sides. You see, your hand can't just touch it. There are protection brackets on both sides, and no pilot or nobody can accidentally drop the switch or push it back. That's one point. The other thing is, can this be remotely controlled? Can this be remotely altered? Because it's a highly computerized system. So that's another question. So one, there are levers, the metal stop lock, you see that? There is a lock. We just go back to that image and then we'll show you the stop lock. There's a small stop lock. Look at this. This one. And then you have the bracket. So there are safety and precautions around the fuel control switch, because everybody understands the importance of this. But Wing Commander Uttam Kumar ji, is it possible that these switches could be controlled remotely, or could there be a malfunction triggered on these switches?
There is absolutely no provision for remote control of this switch. This switch is operated by either the engineering crew or by the pilots as a deliberate action only. As we all have seen, this fuel switch ensures that the booster pump is switched on after when the aircraft is starting up. The booster pump sucks in the fuel and then sends it to the engine, where through a special jet nozzle it is sprayed inside the combustion chamber. And this switch is typically operated by the pilot to off position only in certain emergencies. Say in case there is a fire on engine, in case the pilot suspects that the on ground or in air that one of the engines or both engines have got a fire and a fire warning comes out, that time the pilot deliberately lifts off the guard, operates the lock and now shuts off this engine, this particular switch. The aim being that since engine is on fire, fuel supply to the engine area is to be stopped so that the spread of the fire can be managed. Thereafter, the pilot operates his fire extinguisher so that fire extinguisher can suppress the fire. But there was no indication of any fire till now. This report does not suggest was the engine on fire. Did the pilot report any?
No, sir. This report.
Did the system give any audio warning or visual warning or warning lights came on the control panel indicating that the engine is on fire?
No, in fact,
normally no pilot will touch this switch during flight.
In fact, what they are saying is that in the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? And the other pilot responded that he did not do so. So clearly it has taken even the pilots by surprise. Devesh Agarwal ji, it has taken the pilots also by surprise, whatever has happened inside. And then they have tried to push that switch back on and then revive the thrust in the engines. If there was fire or if there was some problem with any of the engines, why would they try to fire it back up? And the engines have also tried to fire back up. Engine 1 actually came back, it stopped the deceleration, but it could not regain thrust. Engine 2, even though more fuel was injected, that's what the report says, it just could not stop its deceleration. It just could not be revived. Ji.
No, you're very correct. A few things I wanted to clarify. Exactly what the other experts have told on the thing. The fuel control switch, in this case, it is manufactured by Honeywell.
Okay.
It requires a very deliberate action, and in case of the 787, it even has a more improved version where the switch has to be physically pulled outwards, then moved, and then pushed back in. Sometimes, it came earlier in some of the switches, there was a situation where it was pulled out and moved, but it was never pushed back in. So, it sort of remained in a kind of an unlocked position. So this was an additional precaution in the 787 version of the switch. If you see the report, there is a reference to what is called a special SAIB, which was issued by the FAA in 2018, uh, which says that certain switches, this was reported by 737 operators, but these same type of switches made by Honeywell have been installed on pretty much every Boeing aircraft. And the MD-11 and the MD-90, which are typically now used as freighter aircraft, that they were the locking mechanism was disengaged. So they were asked to just check whether the locking feature is there, and if not, if it is suspect, to change the switch. This was purely an advisory bulletin. I have shared with your team, there is a separate service bulletin issued by GE concerning the Gen X engine, which specifically requires a change of the MN4 microprocessor, which is located in the electronic engine control. That was issued in 2020.
Okay.
Now, it has not been referenced anywhere in the AAIB report, but there is this service bulletin by GE that has been issued, and it specifically deals with engine fuel control. So, has this played any action? I don't know. It says that due to excessive thermal conditions, the solder of the IC, which mounts it onto the PCB, has chances of melting or something, degrading. So they said, please change this. Now, that has not been referenced in the AAIB report, and it's fully understandable. See, the preliminary report is only to tell us what happened. Now, the investigation, what will take about a year or so, will tell us why it happened. We know the what, we don't know why.
Well, what I'm trying to understand, Deveshji, and please let's take it among the other guests also, and Captain Randhawa, please weigh in. In your wisdom, is because there is a huge amount of computerization. You said these switches are managed by Honeywell, there is a GE microprocessor in, and there have been concerns flagged off. Now, can they suddenly go bust, or can they be perhaps remotely coded in a way to go corrupt? So, the aspect of sabotage, is that possible? If we were to take what this preliminary report says, where both pilots were confused because one thought the other had touched the switches and the other says, I haven't touched these switches, and they were quite experienced pilots themselves. So, from there on, Deveshji and then Captain Randhawa and then Wing Commander Uttam Kumarji. One by one, your thoughts on this, and we'll take this conversation forward. So please feel free to weigh in. Yes, Deveshji.
I cannot say this, and that's what I think we have to now, that is what the next stage will answer as to why did this happen. Right now we don't know, and that is confusion to me, because I don't expect fuel cutoff switches to be able to be operated electronically, and definitely not from outside the aircraft.
Definitely not from outside the aircraft. Captain Randhawa, the report also says the pilots were rested, there was no problem, and the takeoff vectors were achieved in terms of calculated speeds. They say that the aircraft took off, this is as per EFR data, aircraft cross takeoff decision speed achieved 153 knots at 808.33, 155 knots was achieved at 808.35, and the total speed of recorded as airspeed of 180 knots at about 808.42. And they say moment it hit that speed, engine 1 and engine 2 cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff position. Is there a possibility that there could be a speed trigger in terms of sabotage, or is it not possible at all that can be remotely dropped, the fuel switch? Your thoughts, Captain Randhawa?
First and foremost thing, as the other panelists have also said, there is no way you can remotely cut off these switches and put them to run. There are guards, you have to lift them up, you have to put it off, you have to again lift the guard and put it up. So there is no way that you can do it externally. The second point is the aircraft has accelerated correctly at 153 knots, which is the V1 speed, and got airborne at VR, which is 155. And after liftoff, within a few seconds, these fuel control switches have been moved. Now, it is very, very unfortunate that so fast things have happened. Now, what actually happens when the aircraft lifts off? There is a micro switch in the landing gear. So when it extends, moment the weight comes off the wings, it moves from ground mode to air mode, and there is a power transfer.
Right.
So until unless there is a power transfer and it has triggered the engines to wind down, that is one condition which the DFDR has not brought out. I do not understand that why should the switch be, the fuel control switch be cut off and then put on at such a low altitude. So there is much more to it which the DFDR readout has to come out correctly as to why the engines started winding down. As a process, the APU started, the RAT was deployed because the engines were winding down. Now, why did the engines wind down? That the report is not bringing out. It is just saying that the fuel control switches were recycled. So, I do not understand that why would pilots do. Now, the next point is it was the P2, the co-pilot, was carrying out the takeoff. And he was the pilot flying, and the other pilot was pilot monitoring, the PIC. Now, in such a situation, since the things have happened so fast, normally the PIC in such a situation also takes over the controls. Now, the report has again not clearly said that after this thing triggered off, who had the controls
Yeah.
after liftoff? It's not clear. Now, in case the pilot monitoring was doing the takeoff and was the pilot flying, then the pilot monitoring, he would be cutting off and running the switch, fuel control switch. If it was opposite, then the actions will be performed by the pilot monitoring. Now, why this has happened in such a fast, action was done is, I'm again repeating, the engines could be winding down. And that is why that immediate action they have taken. Now, why they have said that they have not recycled the switch, which is not possible at all, that it can go off and on automatically. There is no way whatsoever. A human interface has to be there. So, external sabotage or movement of these switches externally is totally ruled out. So we need to have much more information from the DFDR, which is not clear. Then secondly, who had the controls after liftoff when this problem occurred? And it will not be known from the DFDR that who has cut off these switches
Right. So,
and put them on.
okay. Now, Wing Commander Uttam Kumarji, can you please also explain, do you concur with, Captain here, Captain Randhawa, that, and his point, what is your point of view? That, these fuel control switches cannot be remotely switched off. So, and then also explain to our viewers this pilot control and pilot monitoring. Does it necessarily have to be the senior pilot or the commander who is always in pilot control, or do these roles get swapped from flight to flight?
Firstly, this switch just cannot be operated remotely. It has to be a deliberate action by somebody in the cockpit.
Okay.
Whether it is engineering staff, they do it during normal routine maintenance or repair or rectification procedure, or it is done deliberately by the pilot, co-pilot from the cockpit. There is absolutely no chance of remotely being done electronically by sending some kind of a message. The circuit, the onboard engine software is not designed to accept any external signal input. Now, what happens during
Okay.
takeoff, any critical time, pilot and co-pilot, there are emergencies which are act emergencies, and there are emergencies which are react emergencies. So, suppose there is a emergency which needs immediate action within next 1 or 2 seconds, then both the pilots can take the action. There is no bar on the co-pilot or the say junior engine. I am just telling the viewers that there may be a co-pilot who is invariably a very junior pilot, but he is highly qualified and certified from taking an action. Both of them can take any action when action is required within 1 or 2 seconds. Classic example being engine on fire will be a very classic example when there is no time to spare. But during training sorties, there is this concept. During training sorties, both the pilots they practice in simulator that in case an emergency takes place, in which certain amount of actions have to be done in a sequence. Action A, then followed by action B, then followed by action C. In this case, commander of the pilot in command, he briefs his co-pilot sequence of events how they will unfold and which pilot will take which particular action. These are pre-briefed actions, and invariably the OEM gives out instructions in writing. There are instructions which OEM and aircraft operator issues to both the pilots. But both the pilots take those actions after, there is a process by which they keep calling out. It
Right.
is a standard system in which the both the pilots say, I am doing action A, okay. I am doing action B, okay. So there is a mutual agreement between both of them, and they know that they are working towards the same purpose. Now, in this case, when the pilot asks, why did you switch it off? This shows certain amount of CRM deficiency. That means one pilot felt that the other pilot has done an action which was unwarranted. Now, what could be the reason for this? Normally, no pilot will switch off this fuel shut-off switch at such a critical phase because of any reason other than extreme emergency. Extreme emergency I can visualize
Right.
is a engine on fire, or due to some reason the engine has shut off on its own.
Okay.
That may happen.
Right. Captain Randhawa wants to say something. Sir, you're on mute.
Anand, I'd like to intervene. I do not at all agree with Uttam regarding this, because the thing is very clear that these, first of all, the actions are very clear. He is saying anyone can take any action. No, it is wrong. The pilot in command only is authorized to call out that what actions have to be taken. It is not the pilot monitoring. He will ask for actions and the pilot in command will start doing the actions. No, they are very clearly defined by the ICAO, by every airline in the world. The PIC is in command. Even when he is pilot monitoring, then he orders. The only thing is that in case there is a case of challenge and response. So if they say fuel control switch left, confirm. So the other pilot says confirm. Then he says cut off. There is a fuel control switch left, confirm, run. So that is how these switches are moved. It is not unilaterally anyone is doing anything and there is ruckus happening in the cockpit. No. It is very clearly defined in the SOPs by the OEM, by the manufacturers of any aircraft, whether it's a civil or a military aircraft. Actions are same. So here, one thing is very clear that as I said earlier,
Ji.
that though the first officer was taking off the aircraft, what happened thereafter when the transfer took place, when the actual emergency started, Who had the controls? These switches. Now, why that call has been given and recorded in the cockpit? He says that the fuel control, who's cut off and who's put it on, no one knows.
Yeah.
It is, but the DFDR will clearly say that these switches have moved from run to cut off and
Yeah.
cut off to run.
Yeah, interestingly, the entire cockpit voice recording has not been shared. Only this passage has been shared where why did he cut off? The other pilot responded that he did not do so. Devesh Agarwalji, we've got to take a break, but you wanted to say something. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was going through the Boeing 787 memory items, this thing. And with due respect to Captain Randhawa, the only place where you don't have a confirmed requirement is for fuel engine failure, for the reset of the switch. Every other part where engine limits get exceeded, or if you're getting a surge or you're having a high temp or anything like that,
Right.
before you move anything, you get a confirmed challenge. But this is the one item which doesn't seem to have a confirm, maybe due to considering the emergency or the nature of emergency, and you have to press and hold the rat switch, the ram
Right.
turbine switch for a second and make it deploy. So obviously the pilots have done this, but it's happened 3 seconds after takeoff. 3 seconds.
Yeah.
It's if somebody says sabotage or anything, who the heck will try to crash a plane at such a low altitude? They want to be then sure. They want to make sure the plane is way up there before they
Right.
take into Mother Earth or into the sea.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Right now, we know what has happened, but we cannot explain why it happened.
Why it happened, and that's the big question, why it happened and how can this aspect happen. Something that is what many believe is a manual function, cannot be remotely controlled, two experienced pilots, one asking the other, that's what the cockpit voice recording, only that bit has been explained. The rest of the conversation has not been put out. Obviously the voice recorder has other points too which have not been put out, and one pilot asking the other, why did you switch it off, the other saying, I did not. And this is happening, like Devesh Agarwalji said, within 3 seconds of liftoff. Why would somebody do it within 3 seconds of liftoff? That's another question which remains. We've got to take a very short break. We join you with more. Stay with us.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
One thing is very clear in the AIB report, that the fuel control switch had been turned off. It was in cut-off position, which means that fuel was not reaching between engines, and that perhaps led to loss of power, loss of thrust. So is this an occurrence which is happening for the first time? There is an answer to it in the report. If you look at the report, it says that the FAA issued Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin in December 2018. And this bulletin was exactly about this kind of a situation. It spoke about potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Does the fuel control switch in Boeing 737 lock or unlock itself on its own? This is what the advisory was all about back in December 2018. The SAIB was issued based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would warrant airworthiness directive. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including, part number 40L837D, which is fitted in B787, Boeing 787. As per information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as the SAIB was advisory and not mandatory. What does this really mean? It means that the fact that the fuel control switch was not getting logged was something that was highlighted earlier also. As far back as December 2018, this issue was raised. However, in subsequent checks, the authorities felt that this was not affecting airworthiness, and therefore they just ordered an advisory. They did not make it mandatory that pre-flight checks should include checking of the fuel switch as well. And therefore, Air India, while giving the go-ahead, did not do this check. whether the fuel control switch was locked or was it disengaged. That check was not carried out because the instructions from the authorities were that this check was not mandatory. It was an advisory in nature. It was advisable. Could this have been the critical lapse that the AIB will have to probe further? If this was a mechanical failure, did the fuel switch get unlocked on its own?
So much content, so many faces. Do you want to be standing out here and watching them? Or you want to be part of this entire creation of content? If you think you have it in you, come create for us. So you've seen the big arc lights here, the flashy cameras, but beyond all of this, journalism is all about hard work. So if you have it in you to make a name for yourself in this hyper-competitive industry, then let CNN News 18 be your platform. So much content, so many faces. Do you want to be standing out here and watching them? Or you want to be part of this entire creation of content? If you think you have it in you, come create for us. Back live here on our continuous coverage, and there is one important aspect as we try and get you the details of the preliminary report of the AI 171 crash in Ahmedabad, and the report points to the fuel cutoff switch moving from run to cutoff within 3 to 4 seconds of liftoff. We'll try and go across to our guests also. Now, there are also other questions of whether an FAA warning was ignored. I'll tell you about that in a bit. But let's try and understand this entire fuel control switch system. Now, moving a fuel control switch from run to cutoff in flight would cause the fuel supply to stop flowing to the associated engine. This is what will happen. Now, this may result in its immediate shutdown and the loss of any thrust. Now, here's how the in-flight management actually works. Pilots monitor the fuel levels, pressure and fuel flow. The pilots may then need to manage the entire fuel distribution, but this is all done with communication and it is all recorded. Alerts and warnings are generated for fuel-related issues, which are then acted upon by the pilots. So these are some of the aspects, and let's try and understand the fuel control switch again. How does a fuel control switch look, and how there are safety precautions even in the fuel control? If you can just call out those graphics again and then put it here on the screen. The fuel control switch, let's try and understand this. Now, the 787's two-position fuel control switches, run and cutoff, are used on the for the takeoff and landing maneuvers and also to power the flight. The metal lock, let's try and just stay on this picture if we can. Let's look at this carefully, viewers. This is the fuel control switch. There are two positions, run and cutoff. What's important? That there is a lock mechanism here. You've got to unlock this before you got to move this. You see this? When this lock is here, this switch cannot move up. So this has to be manually flipped for this to go up. The same case here for the other engine. You see this ring here. You got to flip this for this to move, because otherwise it drops here and it stops this from coming up, so that accidentally also the hand doesn't push this up. The other thing is there are brackets on both sides. What do these brackets do? The brackets also say when you're moving your hand across controls, it doesn't touch the switch. So there are dual safety mechanisms, and what many pilots and experts say is these two are not connected to any computer, nothing. This switch may be electronically, but this is a manual lock. It's a small lock like this. It's a small thing which just stops. It's a restrainer. And this has to be flipped by the pilots, one of the pilots. So this is what is important. And then here is the bracket. So that's why that many are saying now, based on what is written in the preliminary report, that less of a sabotage and more of what actually happened inside the cockpit. Because moment this switch flipped from run to cut off, obviously if I shut down the fuel, what will happen? The engine gets no power. If it doesn't power, it decelerates. If it decelerates, there is no thrust. And this is happening within 3 seconds of liftoff. So the aircraft is in a climbing position. It's not high in the sky. So if it was to be sabotage or if it was to be something else, as experts are pointing out, they would say it should be when the aircraft has achieved a certain height. This is just at liftoff. What's the point? What was a saboteur trying to do? These are questions. Now these are details of the crash report. Anvit is joining us live at this point. Anvit, was there a 2018 FAA advisory about these fuel control switches? Were these locks there inside this aircraft? Or was there a point in the call logs which pointed out, for the previous call logs, which said that perhaps this is not functioning? Anvit?
Yes, see, there have been advisories on this fuel switch, and as far as this particular aircraft is concerned, that air safety experts have said that a fuel switch cannot be mistakenly switched off. If this switch is used, it immediately cuts the power, the fuel supply to the engines. And if we talk about what aviation experts have to say in this, they say that the pilot would not be able to accidentally move the fuel switches that feed the engine. If done so, the fuel supply is immediately cut. To prevent accident, there are independent power systems and wiring for the fuel cut-off switches, and the fuel valves controlled by those switches. So that's a completely different system and different wiring system and different power system for fuel switches. So to prevent any accidental transition from run to cut-off or vice versa. Also, the fuel control switch on this aircraft, Boeing, if you're talking about Boeing 787, these aircraft were located below the thrust levels, like you also mentioned on earlier, and the switch are spring loaded to remain in position. So it is very unlikely that it could have happened mistakenly. Also, to change from run to cutoff, a pilot has to first pull the switch up and then move it from run to cutoff, or the other way around. So the report, as this goes on to mention, that yes, it could have possibly been because of the fuel switch and the supply was cut off, and it was noted that the fuel switches had transitioned from run to cutoff. Another important point is that the RAT deployment, because we see that as soon as the aircraft are taken off, the CCTV footage, which also the report goes on to mention, that RAT had been already deployed. So was it at the time of takeoff that RAT has been deployed? Because this report does not go on to mention. Also, the experts have not been able to conclude that could there be a possibility that if the fuel switch had already transitioned when the flight was on ground or was rolling on the runway, then would there be enough fuel for the plane to take off to reach that altitude of 650 feet or not? So that is one thing that needs to be concluded on, that whether there was as much fuel available already even after the transitioning, the switch transitioning to cutoff, for allowing the plane to reach that altitude, or there was some other reasons involved. Also, human intervention and mechanical intervention is being looked at, which also have not been concluded. So preliminary findings suggest that there was a power outage or fuel outage in the engines, and engines had lost power, but concluding remarks have not been made. Only preliminary findings have been given in this report.
Right. So now in this case, the preliminary findings have been given. If was there anything in the flight log that this aircraft took? Because there is a separate flight log which happens, and there are observations that are being made when the prior flight actually came into Ahmedabad from completing its previous leg. Is there anything that points to some issues which perhaps were not seen as very clearly important or technical, but they needed to be done, especially with the fuel control switches? Were the switches functioning properly, the lock mechanisms, and also the safety measures? There was nothing off with it. Is there any mention of this? Do we have any information there, Anvit?
Yes, see, the report goes on to mention a lot of pre-flight checks. They have mentioned that the flight, all the precautions were taken, all the parameters were checked before the flight took off. If I could read out them in detail, it goes on to say, not only talking about that the pilots had adequate period of rest, the crew was fit to fly, but it also goes on to say that the takeoff was allowed within allowable limits. It also goes on to say that the taxi clearance was given by the ATC, and it says clearly that the takeoff clearance was issued and the aircraft had started started rolling after due completion of process. It says that immediately after the aircraft had achieved maximum record speed of 180 knots also. So these are the data that had been retrieved from the FDR, and based on these findings and the retrieval of data, experts have reached this conclusion that immediately after thereafter the engine 1 and 2, immediately after the takeoff, fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff. So these are the conclusions that the investigators have reached, and they have also gone on to say that engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to engine was cut off. But if we talk about the pre-flight checks, including the log, maintenance log, they have been found to be adequate at this stage of investigation. However, there are many other data that have been retrieved, and that still analysis of that is still underway. Also, statements of not just people who could be the witness or those who were involved in this the process of this flight, not only them but also the technical staff and the ground staff, their statements have been recorded, including the staff that had handled the flight at the Delhi airport when it reached Ahmedabad, and then those who had handled its onward journey to Gatwick. So those statements have been recorded. That will be analyzed. Also, the data that has been retrieved from FDR and cockpit voice recorder, that is still under analysis. So more conclusions are yet to be brought out from this the data that has been retrieved.
Right. Now, we've got an image of a fuel control switch and how it looks, and we're going to confirm whether this is of a Boeing 787, inside a Boeing 787, viewers. If you look at the fuel control switch and the levers, the next picture, now this is the Boeing 787 fuel control. Now, there are small lock mechanisms. There are no brackets. So every aircraft has a different design in terms of the cockpit and how the levers are. So let's try and understand this. This is the cutoff, and there is the run at the top. There are brackets on the side. You see the brackets on the side? There are brackets on the side, and at the bottom, if you see, there are those small resistors which have to be moved before you drop it down. So it's not possible that it would just drop down on its own, and especially when the pre-flight check showed that everything was all right. So now was there a slip between the cup and the lip? That's the question. What happened? And what are the other conversations the two pilots had in the cockpit voice recording? Because only 2 lines have come out so far. Mayday, mayday, mayday towards the end at around 8:09. And then before that, why did you switch it off, cut off the fuel? The other person says, I did not cut off the fuel. So these are the 2 parts that we know, but before, after, what are the other conversations that were had as they were trying to restart the engines and try and push the lever back, all of this. And this is all happening around the same time that I have taken to try and tell you this, viewers, in a matter of seconds. We'll see you after the break.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
One thing is very clear in the AIB report, that the fuel control switch had been turned off. It was in cut-off position, which means that fuel was not reaching between engines, and that perhaps led to loss of power, loss of thrust. So is this an occurrence which is happening for the first time? There is an answer to it in the report. If you look at the report, it says that the FAA issued Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin in December 2018. And this bulletin was exactly about this kind of a situation. It spoke about potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Does the fuel control switch in Boeing 737 lock or unlock itself on its own? This is what the advisory was all about back in December 2018. The SAIB was issued based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would warrant airworthiness directive. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including, part number 40L837D, which is fitted in P787.787. As per information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as the SAIB was advisory and not mandatory. What does this really mean? It means that the fact that the fuel control switch was not getting logged was some.
Back live on our special coverage on the AI 171 preliminary report. 30 days since the day of the accident, the AAIB is mandated to submit the preliminary report, and this was uploaded around 1:30 in the night by the AAIP on the intervening night as far as Bharatiya Standard Time is concerned, between the 11th and 12th of July, viewers. And we're getting you the details, and it points to the fuel control switch moving from run to cut off within 3 seconds of liftoff, takeoff. Highly unusual, improbable. Many people and many experts we are speaking with here continuously point to the fact that this has to be a manual action. It cannot be done remotely. And there are reasons why. We'll get into that in just a bit. Now let's try and understand the crash report and what all has been observed. The aviation watchdog looking into this tragic crash has submitted this report, and we've pulled out some of the important points to consider. Let's try and understand that the data shows that the fuel control switches, cutoff switches of both engines were moved from run to cutoff, and one after the other, and this happened within 3 seconds of takeoff, and this caused a complete loss of thrust just seconds after liftoff. The cockpit audio also highlighted in the report, and at that only this line is being highlighted. It points to there was confusion about the shutdown of the engines because one of the pilots is has been reported asking the other, "Why did you cut off?" And the other one says, "I did not do that." Now, whether this was the pilot command telling the pilot monitoring or vice versa, we don't know. And who was the pilot in command and who was the pilot monitoring among the two pilots, that has also not been revealed so far. Investigators say this points to either an accidental switch movement or a system failure. However, government sources have revealed to CNN News 18 that they want to wait till the final report comes out. Now, soon after the crash report, both Air India and Boeing said they will continue to cooperate with the authorities in the ongoing probe. So let's try and understand the 787 fuel control switches. There are two modes in these switches. There is the run and cut off. So this is the lever for takeoff, landing, and this is the main lever. Beneath that, you see the brackets present, and then you have these two switches. This is for the left engine and this is for the right engine. So engine 1 and 2, however you want to call them, this is what it does. This is the R position or run position, and down position is the cutoff position. Now, there are brackets here. These brackets are there to avoid that you're going for this switch or you touch this and there are some accidental movements. That's one. The second is there is supposed to be a lock at the top or at the bottom to keep the switch in place. It's a spring switch, so it's got to stay in place. Once you pull it down, it stays there, and you lift it up, it's got to be lifted up. It doesn't go float here and there easily. Now, it's used for cutting off or starting the engine, shut down, restart. This is what the fuel cutoff does. Fuel supply is critical because everything is powered by the engines and the supply has to go, fuel has to go. The report very clearly says there was no contamination of fuel. The report also says there was effort to restart the engine. That means move this from cutoff to run again and kickstart the engines too. And this was done. But if this, while the aircraft is running, if from run to cut off, what will happen is there will be a sudden stalling of the engine. The engines will shut down. There will be loss of thrust, especially at the time you have liftoff. This aircraft was 2,13,000 kilograms heavy, well within the overall max limit of 2,18,000 kilograms. It was also carrying 54,000 liters of fuel on it. And soon after liftoff, this switch off happened. How is a big question. Why is another big question. What happened is what this report is telling us. Now, the lock requires a switch to be lifted before, and there are guarded brackets to prevent accidental movement. So these are questions now that remain. Aviation experts are saying this job of switching up and pushing down or pushing up between run and cut off, this is a manual effort. Highly improbable that this could have been remotely tampered with. So then what happened in the cockpit is a big question. It now points to the cockpit data recording and the details of what was the voice interaction between the two pilots. Anvit Srivastav tracking the story very carefully. Arunima, Payal Mehta, Pallavi and Aman also with us. We'll try and go across to all of them in a bit. But Anvit, this is the big part. There are two questions. One, if this cannot be remotely done, what was the exchange between the two pilots? Secondly, who was the pilot in command and who was the pilot monitoring? Because one of the pilots had more than 8,800 hours of flying, the other pilot had about 1,100 hours of flying. Both as per the report, were well rested and competent enough to fly. The point is, if you are driving a car or a bike, as you are starting the car, will you ever turn the switch off, fuel gauge off? Now, how can that be done at a time of liftoff when maximum thrust is required? Why would somebody cut off the fuel? These are questions.
Yeah, certainly. And see, these are questions, and like you pointed out that these fuel switches cannot be remotely tampered. Also, it looks very unlikely when the aviation experts have said that it is highly impossible that the fuel could have been tampered remotely, or there could be any sabotage angle, because it would require mechanical expertise or technical expertise at least to find out what switch to tamper with and exactly what it will lead to. And also, like previously, we have seen that the report has shown that the two pilots had also interacted. The cockpit voice recorders data, it clearly shows that one pilot had asked the other that did you switch that switch off, but he says I did not. So it is also not clear since the beginning that was it the first officer or was it the pilot in command who was actually handling the flight at that time and who is speaking to whom. So that is also one thing that needs to be clearly be concluded upon. And also we are talking about the flight switch, the engine fuel switch, and it is also not clearly mentioned in the report as of now, even though it is a preliminary finding, but this has not been made clear as to at what time was the fuel switch found to have been transitioned from run to cutoff, because we are seeing RAT deployment since the beginning, since the aircraft took off. Within 15 to 20 seconds we are seeing
in fact Anvit, it is mentioned, it is inside in this report. I just read that page and I'm going to pull that out, and then we can then perhaps deliberate it. The last page of the report, and I'm just pulling it out, last but one page of the report, it says, see, the aircraft achieved a maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots. It's the last but one page, okay. 180 knots at about 808.42. This is what it very clearly says, 808.42. And then it says, and immediately thereafter, so at 808.42, 808.43, engine 1 and engine 3 fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff position one after the other with a time gap of 1 second. So each one was cut off with a time gap of 1 second, exactly the time that you are lifting off and somebody has the time, or suddenly it goes one down, and that's 1 second. So it is saying that as it recorded, the aircraft achieved maximum airspeed, recorded airspeed of 180 knots, and this was consistent with liftoff at 808.39. 808.39 is liftoff, and exactly 3 seconds later is 180 knots, and at that time, 3 seconds after liftoff, we have engine 1 switching off, and 4 seconds after liftoff, engine 2 switching off. That's what we can infer from the report, Anvit.
Yes, but see, the deployment of ram air turbine, that is not mentioned. Actually, what time did it take place? Because experts we have spoken to earlier, they have gone on to say that the deployment of turbine clearly indicates as to at what time did the aircraft experience that the fuel supply was cut off and the hydraulic failure was detected. Also, the turbine that was deployed, that also clearly indicates that there was a power outage or there was hydraulic failure, because of which the turbine had to be deployed.
Now that is again an inference we can make, because what it says is, in that same page at the bottom, CCTV footage obtained from the airport showed ram air turbine getting deployed during the initial climb immediately after liftoff, right? But then at the bottom it says, as per the EAFR data, both engines N2 values passed below minimum idle speed and the RAT hydraulic pump began supplying hydraulic power at about 808.47. So 808.47 is recorded at the bottom of the page. 808.42 is when the first engine shuts off. 808.43, the second engine shuts off because they said within 1 second of each other. 4 seconds later, the engines have decelerated to a level that RAT will deploy at 808.47, that it has started supplying hydraulic power. So in those 4 seconds between 808.43 and 808.47, that's when the engine deceleration has happened. RAT has been deployed, which is now confirmed with the images that were recorded on CCTV during liftoff. Now, Anvit, stay on with us. We'll go to our reporters, beg your pardon, our experts in a bit. But first, questions are also being raised on how the fuel control switches were cut off mid-air. Now, here is how that system works. Fuel is drawn from tanks, pressurized by pumps, and it flows through lines. It passes through filters to remove impurities. Fuel control unit then regulates the fuel flow to the engine. Fuel and air are mixed in the carburetor before cylinder delivery. Fuel-air mixture is ignited, producing power to drive the aircraft. But it all has to happen when there is fuel flow. This report, viewers, very clearly confirms that there was no contamination with fuel, whatever was checked, and also there was a effort to revive the aircrafts. And when the effort to revive the aircraft happened, fuel was pumped into the engines. Engine 1 stopped decelerating, revived, but did not get enough thrust. Engine 2 had led to a certain level of deceleration to that extent that despite extra fuel being pumped into that engine, it did not revive itself. And it all happened in a matter of seconds, and there wasn't enough elevation at 625 feet, 213,000 kilograms of weight, no thrust. It just crashed. All between 808.33 to 809.11. That's when all of this has transpired. Let's go across to our guest, Captain Saurabh Bhatnagar, joining us live, former senior pilot A320 and Indigo, and also KVJ Rao, former cabin crew, Air India, joining us at this point. Namaste and Jai Hind, Captain Saurabh Bhatnagar. If I may ask you, how would you, morning, how would you
morning.
We've had this conversation about the RAT, we've also talked about the fuel tanks, we've also talked about this, but this is the fuel control switch. How can the fuel control switch at liftoff, within 3 seconds of liftoff, go from run to cutoff? And one pilot looks at the other and asks, why did you do that? And the other pilot says, hey, I have not done it.
Yeah, it's just it's quietly and it's totally unbelievable how it can happen, and it's very easy, first of all, to blame the pilot. And the third thing is how this report came 2 days before in Wall Street Journal that this fuel control switches. Having said that, now the thing is that yes, within 3 seconds, we all have read the report. Within 3 seconds of liftoff, the fuel control switches were commanded from run to off. What I can think of, it's not possible at all, because it's a spring-loaded switch. You have to manually lift it off the detent, then put it back to the off position. Automatically, it will not, even with the inertia, it will not go.
So, Captain Saab, please explain for somebody who does not understand, what is a spring-loaded switch? Does that mean that there has to be a certain effort to try and bring it down or pull it up? And once you push it up, agar wo spring toot gaya, will it still be jammed there, or can it just drop off? Please explain, Ji.
No, see, the thing is, it's a spring loaded means that you have to lift it, that it's forced in the detention position, whether it is off or it is on. Now to lift it from the run position to off, so you have to, with the both fingers, you have to, or with the thumb, generally it happens with the both fingers, you go below this toggle switch, lift it up against the spring tension, bring it again, that's in a detent, because automatically it cannot slide down. You can see it's in an angle. It will not slide down to the off position because it's in a detent. It's in a lock position, lock and then detent position. Now you have to lift it off from there away, and then you have to bring it back to the off position. It goes back into the position again in the off position. Automatically sliding down from the run to the off, it's absolutely
so it's not, and pardon me, because there are viewers who would want to understand this clearly, so I'm just asking you again, it's not like a on and off switch that happens.
No.
And it's not like a lever that I just pull it down, pull it out, pull it up. I have to pull it outward first and then drag it down. And if I have to lift it, I have to pull it outward and then drag it up.
Absolutely. And also there is a guard, if you know, there is a guard on the both sides of switches, metal fixed guard to the console, that your hand doesn't go to toward the switches. So
Yeah,
you have
those
to
brackets
manually-
which are there.
The brackets are there.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to manually lift the toggle switch, get it back to the off position, then again it goes automatically inside because the spring is there, right? So even if something happens, it's in the detent position. Now, why any pilot would do 3 seconds after takeoff? That what explains also that the landing gear lever was also down, because that there was no call for the positive rate as well. Even after takeoff, 10 seconds. Another thing I want to bring out, if you have read, you already read everything I marked on the report, that these two switches were commanded off within 1 second of each other. Highly improbable. Both the hands of the pilot, whosoever is flying, flying will have both the hands on the yoke, and from there, even if somebody has to get it, it will take at least 2 to 3 seconds, one after another, if you put both hands together and do it simultaneously. Number two, again the timeline says that coming back on position, there was a gap of 4 seconds. Off was a gap of 1 second, on was a gap of 4 seconds. Yes, that is still, it is, understandable. Yes, it will take 2, 3, 4 seconds for one off and then on. So why this was within 1 second was off and the 4 seconds? So it is very easy to blame a pilot, because till the time the report
but
comes,
I'm just asking, since you've flown the aircrafts, and I'm asking you, does it take more than 1 second to move from one lever to the other? Because they say engine 1 dropped from run to cutoff, and within 1 second engine 2 also dropped. So
No,
is it that fast? And if that was some action that was so fast, won't the pilot monitoring also notice this?
No, I don't think. Even if you do very fast, 1 second, there is a gap of at least 2 to 3 inches between the two switches. You put one, and the moment you take your hand on the second switch, you already lost 1 or 2, 3 seconds. It is quite surprisingly how it is the report is saying, or the EFR obviously is not telling the lies. Within 1 second, any sane pilot will not do it. And third thing is that even if you have any failure on the takeoff, you don't touch anything till the time 400 feet, you are safely airborne. In this case, even if you have to put it off and put dual engine failure, you do it, put it off and put it on immediately. Not wait for 10 seconds for the engine 1 to come back onto the run position. 10 seconds, you do it back to open the fuel shut-off valve in case it is closed.
No, but here they didn't even have those 10 seconds. The other question I want to ask, and we've got this confirmation now, and please explain to our viewers. KVJ Rao, coming to you in a bit, sir. Thank you for your patience. I will ask you your opinion also on this. Now, there are questions about this pilot command and pilot monitoring. What aviation experts will explain is that because there are two pilots, there is one pilot who's the pilot in command or in control. That means the person who's flying the aircraft. The other one takes on the responsibility of pilot monitoring or the co-pilot at this time. Now, it does not mean that senior, junior, whoever is senior, Captain Saurabh Bhatnagar, please tell me that whoever is senior will always be pilot command. No, overall aircraft commander is the senior most pilot, but the person flying the pilot aircraft can be different. Now, in this case, we are told that the pilot flying was co-pilot, CPL holder, 32 years old. Clive Kunder was the co-pilot, pilot flying. Captain Sumit Sabharwal was the pilot monitoring, but he was also the pilot in command of the aircraft. So he was the PIC because he had more than 8,260 hours of flying as a B787 PIC. Co-pilot had about 1128 hours on a Boeing 787. Now, and this was one of his likely one of his early international long-haul flights. That's what they are saying. Highly experienced, responsible for systems checks, radio comms and oversight. So that's the responsibility between the pilot flying, pilot monitoring, and there is a PIC, that is a pilot in command. So not necessarily that the pilot in command always is the pilot flying. Captain Saurabh Bhatnagar, please explain this to our viewers. Have I got it right?
What you're saying is correct. Yes. The pilot in command is the overall commander of the airplane, responsible for the safety, security of the passengers, crew and of the aircraft. The aircraft can be flown from both the sides, from the left as well as right. The first officer, the captain, who is a pilot in command, always sits on the left side, but the aircraft can be flown from the left and right. The right side is called, whosoever is flying the airplane is called the pilot flying. The other one is called the pilot monitoring. So I did not see in the report where it is mentioned that co-pilot or the first officer in the right seat was actually flying the aircraft, and who was on the control at that point of time. whether it was whether it was the first officer on the right side or the pilot in command who was on the left side. So that's I didn't see any. If you can point out, I don't know. I didn't see anything who was actually flying, who was on the control. But
no,
yes,
I think no. That's what the confirmation has come, that Captain Sumit Sabharwal was pilot monitoring.
No, the report doesn't say anything.
And Clive Kunder, no, this has come earlier, sir. This has come earlier, and we've got the confirmation of this. That
you can't.
no, we have confirmation of this, that Clive Kunder was the co-pilot and pilot flying, and Captain Sumit Sabharwal was pilot monitoring. We'll try and go across to Anvit or Arunima to get a confirmation of where we have this information, but this is the information that we have. But I also want to quickly ask you, who controls the fuel switches?
It is the pilot. See, it depends. It actually, the thing is, in case of an engine failure, it is the pilot monitoring who does the fuel control switch, because pilot flying will be flying in case of an engine failure. Okay, so like in this case, or in case you have an engine failure, the thrust levers are, a failed engine is put to everything. It's a challenge and response. You just can't do like that. The thrust levers is always with the pilot flying, never with the pilot monitoring. The fuel control switches or the thing is with the pilot monitoring, or only after the pilot flying tells yes. Okay, it confirms it, and then pilot flying confirms it, only then. It is a normal procedure for to switch off an engine in the air.
Okay.
So, the thing is, in the preliminary report also, the AIB has not said that who is flying, left or right seat. So, any confirmation has to come from the AIB. That
I've got Arunima with us, and I think we have the confirmation here, and it was mentioned earlier who was pilot flying and who was pilot monitoring. Arunima, the report, the information that we have is that Captain Clive Kunder was the co-pilot and the pilot flying in this flight, and the pilot in command, Captain Sumit Sabharwal, was the pilot monitoring.
Yes, if you go to page number 13 of the report, subpoint 12, which is subheaded as accident flight, there para 4, crew of flight AI-71 arrived at whatever time. There were 20 passengers, fuel was this much, and then if you go further down, it talks about cockpit voice recording. One of the pilots is heard asking why he has cut off, and if you go further down in that para, it is made very clear that the co-pilot was actually in the pilot's chair at that point of time. He was the one who was flying, and Captain Sabharwal was the one who was assisting him at that point of time. And subsequently, if you come down in the report, that is where it says that the line of sight of the pilot who was flying was such that he could not have seen the position of the fuel switch, and that's why the cockpit voice recorder becomes that much more important, where he turns around, one pilot is heard asking at this particular place where the cockpit voice recorder conversation is mentioned by the AIB report. They do not clarify who's saying, whether it is pilot flying or pilot monitoring. It is not even identified by name. So I think that's what our experts are pointing out too, that in that particular cockpit voice recorder section, it is not mentioned who's saying what. But if you read the report in finality and go through the further lines that I just mentioned, it's clear that Captain Sabharwal is the one who's assisting, and Clive Kunder is asking, why have you turned the fuel switch off, and to which the answer is, I haven't done so. So what is very clear is that the fuel switch, there was something wrong with it. A few experts on our channel have said that this looks like somebody tampered with it, but the AIB report is silent on it. It's also very clear, and it has been explained too, that how does the fuel switch really work. Page 10, Anand, if you can go down to the picture here, page 10 of the report actually shows you the fuel control switch, and there are two fuel control switches here. Once again, I would like to show it here. There are two switches here. One can be tampered with, but can you mistakenly, if you consider it was a mistake, both switches, and it's not as if inadvertently you put your hand. What experts say is that you have to pull out the
That's
spring.
exactly what Captain Bhatnagar was also explaining, that these are spring switches, so you got to pull the switch out and then drop it down, pull the switch out and pull it up for run and off, and it cannot happen within 1 second because both the switches dropped down within 1 second, and Captain Bhatnagar was saying it's not. This is actually the point 12, accident flight, and Captain Bhatnagar, and to our viewers, what Arunima was mentioning, I'm just showing what was written. It says the aircraft was scheduled to operate flight AI 171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick with ETD 740. The flight was to be operated by the flight crew comprising an ATPL holder PIC, a CPL holder co-pilot along with 10 cabin crew. Both pilots were based at Mumbai and had arrived in Ahmedabad on the previous day. They had adequate rest period prior to operating the said flight. The co-pilot was pilot flying, Captain Bhatnagar and Mr. Rao, and to our viewers, and the PIC was pilot monitoring PM for the flight. So that clears it. So Sumit Sabarwal, the PIC was the pilot monitoring. Clive Kundar, the co-pilot, was the pilot flying. Now Mr. Rao, do you concur with Captain Bhatnagar when he says that in 1 second both switches cannot be dropped? One. And who would be responsible? Because after this, sir, in the report they never say PIC or PF. They just say one pilot said to the other. They never even say who called out, who gave the mayday call. That's not mentioned in the report. Yes, Mr. Rao.
Good morning, Anand. Good
Morning,
Captain Bhatnagar. What Captain Bhatnagar said is absolutely right. In normal parlance, these switches would be called fail-safe switches. When I say fail-safe, is if you put it in a particular position, it will stay in that position till you practically manually move it to whichever position you want it. So it is quite true that put both of them off together, the time gap would be around at least 7 seconds. Because you need to put one off, lift one, put it down, then move your hand. That takes some time. So it's a conundrum. We'll have to wait till the final thing as to why this happened. And regarding the conversations, yes, we don't know which pilot asked which pilot as to who cut off those switches. So we'll have to wait for that also, because that's surprising, because the DFDR would have recorded from which side the voice was recorded. So that also should have, it would have been made it very easy. It can't be left in limbo as it has been done
Mr.
right
Rao,
now.
just 30 seconds to our viewers. When we say pilot 1 and pilot 2 to the left and right, it's representative. It's not to say that it was the pilot on the left hand side of your screen said it and the pilot on the right hand side responded. No, we're just showing it as representative. So please bear with us there. Which pilot said to who, we do not know. Yes, KVJ Rao. Ji.
Another thing that I would like to actually stress on, when they say the pilots had adequate rest, we really don't know, because my fight with the DGCA has always been, what do you describe as adequate rest? Because Anand, you have to understand one thing. Okay, this gentleman flew from Bombay to Ahmedabad, so body clock was Indian time. But sometimes you're crossing multiple zones. Fatigue plays in, and the rest period actually decided by DGCA is not really sufficient to recover from the jet lag, the time zones and other things. So I'm not getting into that aspect as of now. But fatigue factor has never been considered by DGCA, which is a very, very important factor. Like they say, rest has been given. Sometimes what happens is, they say from the time you take the key till the call is your rest period. But you have to understand that the moment I take the key, it takes me at least half an hour to settle down in a room. Nobody factors that in. And this is what we've been raising time and again. Okay, rest can't start from the key to call. It's called key to call. Rest period is considered key to call by aviation people. But then from the time I get the key, sometimes the room is not correct. I'm changing rooms. There are other. So, a leeway margin has to be given, which is not done. And I have, on numerous occasions on your channel itself, I've said that people who have never flown an aircraft, never worked on an aircraft, are the ones who decide what your rest period is going to be. So, I mean, that is one aspect of it. Like I said, yes,
No,
these
no,
are all
I understand.
fail-safe.
I think those are all issues or malaise that plagues the overall airline functioning and the vagaries of perhaps getting
Yes.
operations on board with a limited number of people and to try and manage so many flights. But post that there has been correction. There has been a reduction in the number of flights, operational flights of Air India. So those are issues. But in this case,
No.
in this case, at liftoff, would anyone, either the PIC or that means, beg your pardon, the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring, even look towards the fuel switches, Captain Bhatnagar?
No, they will not, because they're concentrating on other things, because the fuel is flowing.
Yeah.
So why would I want to stop it?
That's exactly what I'm trying. Captain Bhatnagar, is that possible inside the cockpit? Are you even thinking of looking towards the fuel control switches at liftoff? You're on mute, Captain Bhatnagar.
Sorry. That's absolutely not not at all. This is not the way it function. At the lift off, what happens is the pilot flying has got both the hands on its yoke. The pilot flying in this case was the co-pilot on the right seat. The thrust levers are always with the PIC, pilot in command. So what I can see is that at the PIC, what in our Airbus also, I think the same is following in the Boeing also, at V1, that is the takeoff decision speed. So that is where that is where then you just go no-go situation. Thereafter, the pilot in command, because he will take the call of aborting a takeoff. At that point of time, he generally lifts his hand off from the thrust levers, and the aircraft thereafter gets airborne. So nobody looks at it. Pilot monitoring is looking at the instruments inside. Pilot flying is looking outside for the takeoff. Nobody is looking at the central console panel at that point of time. Even after takeoff, in case of an engine failure, only thing we're looking at is ahead on the screens where the warnings are coming, and there is a checklist.
We've got Arunima's. We've got her into the studio. One of the few things as a layman, somebody who's never has seen a cockpit from the outside, has flown a lot of times. I just have this question to you and to KVJ Rao. There are two things which are paradoxical here. On the one hand, you tell us that these switches have to be operated manually. They can't be actually sabotaged remotely. The other part you say is they cannot be switched or dropped down within 1 second. Thirdly, you say that the last thing that a pilots or the pilots are looking at is the fuel switch when you are at liftoff. Yet we have one pilot asking the other, why did you cut off the fuel? So how are all four of these possible simultaneously?
Okay, now if I may answer that.
Ji.
See, the thing is that the first reaction, the moment you lift off and you see that both the engines pulling down, its only thing is that you're saying that can happen simultaneously if you switch off both the engines, fuel cut-off switch. That's the first reaction any pilot will have to other one. Why do you? Because otherwise the both will not happen or spool down simultaneously. Only it happens if you cut off both the fuel cut-off switches. That is why they must have asked immediately, why did you cut off? Because otherwise both engines, why will they spool down? Even if you have a bird, there was no bird at all. Even if you have an engine failure, one will fail down. Simultaneously happening means both fuel shut-off valve is switched off simultaneously or within a gap of 1 second. That is the first reaction any pilot will have about the fuel cutoff or a start switch or whatever. Why did you switch it off? Because that's one thing which will immediately put both the shut-off valve off and will start the spooling down of the engines. That must have been the reason. Otherwise, nobody is looking inside to see whether they must have gazed after that it is
So you're saying that when the pilots suddenly realized that there is no thrust, they would have noticed that the fuel buttons have come down. Now there is also lens on a 2018 Federal Aviation Administration warning advisory. The Federal Aviation Administration had SAIB had said SAIB NM 18 to 33. This is the entire notification. It had warned of locking mechanism disengagement. Air India did not inspect switches. Advisory was non-mandatory. So this is a 2018 mandate. But although the preliminary report, and Arunima is with us, the preliminary report very clearly said that all the mandated checks have been taken and the aircraft was seen flight worthy. Was there anything in the call records, Arunima, in the previous logs, which suggested that there was a problem with these switches?
Not really, but if you see again page 13, point number 12, accident flight section, second para, it says crew of the previous flight AI 423 had made the pilot defect report entry for status message stab POS XDCR in the tech log. Now, what is stab POS XDCR? I have been speaking to aviation experts to figure this out, and this is what they tell me, that because this is a completely computerized system, everything happens via computer. This is saying that the stabilizer position transducer is which is the tilt of the aircraft nose up or down. That is what this message is all about, stab POS XDCR. The troubleshooting was carried out as per FIM by Air India's on-duty AME, which is the maintenance engineer, and the aircraft was released for flight at 6:40 UTC, which means that there was nothing wrong, nothing amiss found with the fuel switch or with the fuel system when the flight flew in from Delhi to Ahmedabad.
We've got a Boeing Airbus A320 pilot with us on the broadcast. We have a senior member of the Air India cabin crew with us. Let's ask them, what is this STAP POS XDCR, Captain Saurabh Bhatnagar, and has that got any connection with the fuel control switch?
Not at all. It's an electrical thing. It's called stabilizer position. There's this transducer. Actually, it's a sensor or device which the sensors or measures the position of this horizontal stabilizer which is behind, and then converts into that position into an electrical signal which tells to the pilot that for the aircraft flight control systems. So it has got nothing to do with the fuel. It's an electrical position controlling the horizontal stabilizer, and it's a sensor. It has got no connection with the fuel and with the engine at all.
So then let me come back to the same sequence of events. The sequence of events says that soon after thrust, as per EAFR data, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 and achieved 153 knots at IAS 808.33 UTC. The VR speed 155 knots was achieved at 808.35 as per the EAFR. Aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned into air mode consistent with liftoff at 808.39. The aircraft achieved maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots at about 808.42. So, between 39 to 42, those 3 seconds the liftoff has happened. Suddenly engine 1, engine 2, fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff position. Here it is not saying in the report, Captain Bhatnagar, that the engines shut off. It is actually saying this first happened and then the engines shut off or decelerated. So when you explain that the captain must have felt the engine shutting off, or one of the pilots must have thought one of the engine shutting off, so you would have asked the other, why did you shut off the fuel switches? But here they are saying that the fuel switches dropped within 1 second of each other. Now, can you wrap your head around this? How is this possible?
So that is the report will say how the fuel control switches were commanded or transitioned from the run to the shut-off position with both the pilots not looking down on its own. Somebody has, so that is one thing. Even if the locking mechanism is failed, that's what I'm saying. If the locking mechanism is failed, or I don't know whether the with the hand or inadvertent touch or something of that switches will bring the position from run to the off. I cannot comment on that because of the service bulletin. But the fact still remains that the aircraft was flyworthy. It was released. Naturally, that means this must have been checked.
Let me come back. I'm sorry, I'm pressing you on the, and I have to, because that's where the curiosity is. If, say, one lever was malfunctioning and one switch comes down, does that imply that the other will come down automatically in the fuel control switches?
They are both different. They are just controlling the fuel shut-off valves. So therefore, do different. They are not internally or mechanically connected to each other.
They are not connected.
No.
No. Then what I am saying is, let's say one of them failed. One of them had a problem. One of them dropped, but the other also dropped within 1 second of it. How is that possible?
That is what the inquiry investigation will say. That is the preliminary investigation just come out stating that is quite in one line they have said. That's quite surprising. That is what their job, to find out how it can come down, whether it inadvertently the hand has, the hand of the pilot in command from the thrust lever has dropped down to the fuel control switches. I don't know. It is the investigators to find out and reveal why it can happen.
No, here the thing is, sir, the takeoff has happened at 8:08:35. The aircraft has taxied. Arunima is also making the same, assumption and observation. It's not even before, Arunima.
Yes.
It is also about what happens thereafter.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the timeline to our aviation experts also. 7:56 is when the aircraft starts taxiing. 8:07 it is rolling. 8:08 it has crossed the decisive speed limit, and 8:08 42 fraction seconds past that, maximum speed has been reached. So I'm trying to understand if fuel has been cut off before this 8:08:42, then was it possible that even without fuel reaching, maximum speed could have been hit? Am I wrong in my assumption then that if something went wrong with the fuel switch, it was after the takeoff had happened, mid-air, when the aircraft had lifted off?
Yeah, and not just that. If the switch had gone bad, how did it go back from cutoff to run position? Because in the following page, it says the engine 1 fuel cutoff which transitioned from cutoff to run at about 8:08:52. So, sir, exactly 10 seconds later, 4 seconds later at 8:08:43, the second engine fuel switch comes down. 8:08:47, the RAT starts pushing hydraulic power. The APU kicks on at 8:08:54. But between those 5 seconds at 8:08:52, the engine 1 fuel cutoff transition from cutoff to run. So that means the switch was working, because the pilots clearly have tried to move the switch from cutoff back into run. They've tried to restart and the fuel thing, and then they say at 8:08:56 UTC the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch transitions from cutoff to run. So the other switch was also working.
Yeah.
They were able to put it back from cutoff into run.
Yeah, so the same question then, who really cut it off? How did the cutoff happen mid-air?
That is everybody is looking for the answer to that question, that how both the switches can come down. There can be so many theories. One theory, can that while lifting the hand from the thrust levers, the PIC had accidentally the hand has gone to the cutoff switches. The theory can be many, but nothing can be
sir, in
proven.
practicality, आप कह रहे हैं हो ही नहीं सकता.
And also,
That's what I'm saying. Even if that happens, that's a locking mechanism.
And that can happen if the switches are damaged. Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor is also there. If the switches are damaged, then it can't go back into the run position.
And both switches are damaged
at
the same time?
And the drop is recorded at only 1 second difference, which also, as experienced pilots and many would say, 2 से 3 seconds से ज़्यादा तो लगेगा ही, because you have to pull one, push it down, then pull one, push it down, or vice versa. So there is a movement that happens. It cannot happen in exactly 1 second ka gap. Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor, can you wrap your head around this, sir?
I spoke to you a little while ago.
Ji.
My reading of this preliminary report is that there is absolutely no doubt that both the engines have failed. There is absolutely no doubt that the fuel control switches were operated. My only argument is that why would a pilot give a call for Mayday? Why would he give a call for Mayday if he has himself switched off the fuel control switches? It means there is a loss of thrust on both the engines, which he has recognized. And as per 787 manual, which I have just tweeted, I got an extract of that manual, which says that the first action in case of both engine failure is to recycle the fuel control switch, and which the pilots would have tried. No pilot in his or her mind at any stage of flight, and that too immediately after takeoff, with a fully loaded aircraft with full passengers in the right mind, would operate these fuel control switches.
Exactly.
Next, in a dual cockpit, every action of this nature, these are guarded switches. It cannot be inadvertently moved.
Correct.
It is not that so they are, pressure switches which have to be lifted spring loaded. They have to be moved out of the gate and then brought down. And every action has to be, challenge and response. It means one pilot calls out that I am moving the fuel control switches. The other is supposed to gaze at what he is doing, and he's in agreement with what he is saying. Then only
there is a confirm that comes.
Yeah, it's a norm of challenge and response in a multi-crew cockpit. So no action is done by one person individually. It is always collaborated with the other person. So even if this switch had to be moved, which the report so says, he would have consulted the other pilot, and this is happening just after takeoff. It is just happening after takeoff. So in my appreciation, the engines have failed, and the RAT and other things are collaborating with that. It will only happen the APU and other things coming up. These fuel control switches were moved by the pilot. And there's another thing which I just got from another colleague of airlines. He has mentioned that on 11th of July, the Boeing has issued an advisory to all the airlines to say that the fuel control soldering switch may malfunction and some tests are to be done. So this is a new thing that is emerging. So I don't know the veracity of this input, but needless to say that in my appreciation as a experienced and seasoned pilot, no pilot in his senses of
absolutely
correct mind will do this action. And even if he is doing that, the other pilot, will try to tell him, yes.
We'll stop. Well, say, especially at 3 seconds after liftoff, when you need maximum thrust, why would you want to switch off the fuel control system? No pilot will do it. And the other thing is, it's not possible to do it within 1 second of each other. Thirdly, if their intent was to do something like that, they would not be working to try and restart the engine and push back the levers as per the mandate is concerned. So these are all things which are quite a conundrum here, because a lot of gaps are there to make conclusions. What you talked about 11th of July, we'll try and confirm that in a bit. For that, we're going to take a very short break. Back in a minute. Stay with us.
Dangerously. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
One thing is very clear in the AIB report, that the fuel control switch had been turned off. It was in cut-off position, which means that fuel was not reaching between engines, and that perhaps led to loss of power, loss of thrust. So is this an occurrence which is happening for the first time? There is an answer to it in the report. If you look at the report, it says that the FAA issued Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin in December 2018. And this bulletin was exactly about this kind of a situation. It spoke about potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Does the fuel control switch in Boeing 737 lock or unlock itself on its own? This is what the advisory was all about back in December 2018. The SAIB was issued based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would warrant airworthiness directive. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including, part number 40L837D, which is fitted in P787, Boeing 787. As per information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as the SAIB was advisory and not mandatory. What does this really mean? It means that the fact that the fuel control switch was not getting logged was...
Welcome back to our continuing coverage on the preliminary report, the 15-page report of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board that has now been submitted to the Ministry of Civil Aviation. It's up on their website, and it gives us some preliminary clues, some answers as to why Air India Flight 171 from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick crashed. And it is going in the direction of the fuel control switch. Those two switches that you see, they're called the fuel control switch. They are the ones that allow the movement of the fuel from the fuel chamber, from the fuel tank, out into the carburetor, and from the carburetor into the engines. The engines require the fuel to be fired up and to give the aircraft lift and thrust and power. That fuel control switch was moved from run to cut off, and then back again from cut off to run after the pilots realized that the fuel had been cut off from entering the engines. So the 787 fuel control switches, like I said, there are only two modes there, and it has to be manually done. There's a run mode if the switches are in the up position, and there is a cutoff mode if the switches are in the down position. Now these switches are controlled only either at the start of the flight or after the flight has ended. Now it is not ever moved mid-flight. Something happened inside the cockpit of Air India Flight 171, which resulted in these fuel control switches being moved from the run mode to the cutoff mode, and as a result, immediately the flight lost thrust, it lost power. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. It cannot be done electronically, it cannot be done remotely, it cannot be done by somebody from outside the cockpit. It has happened inside the cockpit because there is a metal stop lock. Now, what you need to do is you have to manually pull both the levers. It has to cross over that metal lock switch and then be placed either down or up. There are also these two metal brackets. They're called the guarded brackets, which are on either side, because in case one captain's hand or the other co-pilot's hand hits these levers, that they don't accidentally move either up or down. So it's an extremely well-designed mechanism, and clearly on board Air India Flight 171, something happened whereby manually the cutoff switches were moved from run to cutoff. The pilots realized that. One pilot asks the other, it's not identified in the report which pilot asked the other, but one pilot asks the other, why did you cut off the switches? Why did you cut off the fuel? And the other pilot replies, no, I did not. Now, we don't know which pilot asked which pilot this question and what the answer was, but we know that one pilot certainly asked the question, why did you cut off the fuel cutoff switches? And the other pilot replies, no, I did not. Let's try and find out more about this. What are these fuel cutoff switches? It has to be operated manually. It cannot be operated electronically. Could there be any kind of mechanical failure, electrical failure that leads to these switches to be snapped, or has it necessarily have to happen by manual action by either the pilot or the co-pilot? Arunima is here with us. She's been tracking the story ever since the crash happened on the 12th of June. Today, incidentally, is exactly 1 month since that. Tell us what this preliminary finding says about why these fuel control switches moved from run to cutoff.
Okay, so the report is not conclusive. It is not reaching any conclusion, and hence the confusion. However, it is pointing out two things. One, that engine lost power, and that was the likely cause for the crash. So all the other theories that we had considered so far, bird hit, that has been negated, fuel contamination, that has been negated, weather condition, that has been negated as well. So if we finally know why the crash happened, it is because fuel was cut off to the engine. Why was the fuel cut off? To that, the answer in this preliminary report is that the fuel control switch went from the cutoff mode to the run mode, and the movement from cutoff, why it was cut off, we don't know. But the pilots, it appeared, tried to put it on the run mode, but the time was not enough, even though one of the engines tried to gain power, but the timing of the entire crash, the timeline is such that it looks like there was not enough time available for the engine to restart. The big question which is unanswered in this report is, how did the fuel switch, and we are showing you on air as well, there are two switches. How do they work? Can you just mistakenly land your hand or your palm on it and it can operate? No, that's what experts tell us. There's a spring, you have to physically lift it up and then move it from cutoff to run, and you can mistakenly do it with one of the two levers, but how is it that fuel was cut off to both the engines? That's a big question that has been left unanswered. Also, if this was a mechanical failure, then towards the conclusion of this report, what the AIB says is that at this stage, neither GE, which is the engine manufacturer, nor Boeing have been asked to carry on any further tests or checks about mechanical failure. That makes it even more intriguing about what really happened with these fuel control switches.
So let's also bring in our guests. So we know a couple of things. The AIB preliminary report is suggesting that the fuel control switch was in the cutoff mode. It should have been in the run mode. The pilots realize this and then they move it back into the run mode. But because the aircraft had not got enough lift off. It had not got enough aerial sort of altitude. If it was 1,000 feet up, then this would not have been a problem. But it was barely, I mean, the maximum height it reached was about 625 feet. So because of that, there wasn't enough time for the fuel supply to go back into the engines. I believe one of the engines then restarts, it's relit, but the second engine is not. The RAT gets deployed. The RAT is the Ram Aviation Turbine, which is a Boeing 787 mechanism whereby if there is a dual engine failure, there is this propeller, and you can hear the noise from those videos that came out on the first day. You can hear the noise of the RAT. You can see the RAT being deployed to try and give you enough electrical power and hydraulic sort of movements inside the cockpit so that the captain and the co-pilot can then find a place to safely land the aircraft. Now, let's go across to Air Marshal Retired Sanjeev Kapoor, former DG Inspection and Safety of the Indian Air Force. KVG Rao is former cabin crew of the Air India. Mark T. Martin is CEO of Martin Consulting and an aviation expert. I want to go across to Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor. So I just want to be very clear. So the preliminary report says that the fuel control switch was in the cutoff position by the time the pilots realized and moved it back to run. There wasn't enough time, there wasn't enough altitude for both engines to get the fuel. Can this happen because of mechanical fault or electrical fault, or can this happen remotely? Can somebody from outside the cockpit do this, or does this 100% have to have been done manually by either the pilot or the co-pilot?
Let's break it down. Absolutely no doubt that both the engines failed.
Yes.
Because, so that's very clear. Now let's break it down. Why would pilot give a mayday call if he is himself switching off this? He has given a mayday call. It means there is some grave emergency which he has seen to, endanger everybody, and that's how. And it's very, very rare in a civil aviation. Air Force aircraft, we do have a lot of situations, it is at that speed and altitude. But in a civil aviation aeroplane, immediately after getting airborne, give a mayday call by the pilot is the first indication that something very serious has happened. So in my appreciation, having seen and heard and read whatever, I just tweeted the manual page of 787, which says in case of both engine failures, the crew manual, the air crew manual says of 787, that the fuel control switches, the first action is to recycle the fuel control switches. So in my appreciation, there is a loss of power, and as the action takes, both are seasoned pilots, and there is no, I was speaking to Anand a little while ago, that there is no action in a multi-crew cockpit which one person can do by himself or herself.
Okay.
It is always challenge and response. So one pilot will say moving the fuel control cutoff switch to off. The other one will say, okay. And he looks, it is not that, and this is not run of mill switch which with one flick it goes down.
Yeah.
These are power loaded, spring loaded switches in latches. So these have to be physically moved out of the gate, lifted and brought down. It is not inadvertent touching. So the crew would have tried to relight the engine in my appreciation, and that's how this switch movement has been recorded. Now, why did the engines fail is the question in my appreciation which didn't come out very clearly in this report. Engines failed.
Let me ask Mark Martin, who's the CEO of Martin Consulting and aviation expert. Mr. Martin, so from this 15-page report, what we do know is that the fuel control switches were in cutoff position. They should have been in run position. The pilots realize it and they pull both back into the run position. One of the engines gets relit. The second one did not have enough time to get relit. And of course, the RAT had already been deployed and the plane crashes. But the question is, does this necessarily have to be done manually? Why did they do that? Why was it in cutoff in the first place? How come no one noticed it? Or were they moving it from run to cutoff and from cutoff back to run because it was a dual engine failure? And as Air Marshal said a moment ago, that is the aircrew manual for when there is a double engine failure.
Let's understand the facts behind this. Okay, first up, you're at 180 knots. You're 800 feet, you had your takeoff thrust, you lost both engines. Now, when you lose both engines, then that's far more significant than cutting off your fuel. Your fuel cutoff valve, the switch which is there, you got to pick it up, put it over the bridge, and then put it down. Okay. Now, there's no chance in hell that the fuel cutoff switch is going to be is going to automatically trigger unless there was severe vibration on the aircraft that triggered something to push it back. Now let me be very, very clear over here. This is a digital aircraft. The whole aircraft is computer controlled. It's software controlled. It's got something called LSAP, loadable software as a part. Every part of what you see in that aircraft in the 787 is controlled by a software system and a server. Now, the first question of mystery I have here is that, first of all, no pilot would be stupid or dumb enough during takeoff when his attention is focused forward on the flight instruments. He still is flying a manual, he's hand flying it, he hasn't activated the auto throttle, autopilot is not engaged, he's climbing at 800 to 1000 feet, he's still flying manually. There's no chance in hell your hands are going to go back and fiddle around with the fuel cutoff. Something is wrong with the fuel cutoff. Now if you read the same report, if you've seen the pages before and not gone to why the crash happened, in 2018, Boeing issued a service bulletin stating that there have been incidents where the fuel cutoff valve has gone back to cut off from run. This was the part number. This part number is constant in the 737 and the 787. It's the same part, guys. Let me be clear.
Sorry, Mr. Mark, I'm going to interrupt you. Just give me 1 second because we have to take a break. That's mentioned in this AIB report as well. This 2018 advisory was a non-mandatory advisory from FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to all airliners. It was a non-mandatory one. That's been cited in this report as well. We'll talk about that in just a moment on the other side of this quick break.
Dubai. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
One thing is very clear in the AIB report, that the fuel control switch had been turned off. It was in cut-off position, which means that fuel was not reaching between engines, and that perhaps led to loss of power, loss of thrust. So is this an occurrence which is happening for the first time? There is an answer to it in the report. If you look at the report, it says that the FAA issued Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin in December 2018. And this bulletin was exactly about this kind of a situation. It spoke about potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Does the fuel control switch in Boeing 737 lock or unlock itself on its own? This is what the advisory was all about back in December 2018. The SAIB was issued based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would warrant airworthiness directive. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including, part number 40L837D, which is fitted in B787, Boeing 787. As per
Welcome to our continuing coverage here of the preliminary finding of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, the AAIB, which was constituted under the Ministry of Civil Aviation. It has released a 15-page report which goes into what caused the crash of Air India Flight 171 from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick on the 12th of June. Today is exactly 30 days, a month since that fatal crash in which 241 out of 242 passengers died. Let's bring you up to speed with what the findings of the Aircraft Investigation Board are. Remember, the flight reached about 600 odd feet. Number one, both engines shut mid-air. This is what we've all been talking about for the last 1 month. It was a dual engine failure. The report attests that both engines had failed. Why did they fail? It also shows that at one point, before the 30th second, at one point, engine 1 gets relit. Fuel had been cut off to both engines. We'll get to that in 1 second, why that fuel was cut off. Engine 2 was also relit, but it failed to stabilize. It was not able to generate enough power for giving the aircraft enough lift and thrust to move up. It had reached only 600 feet. Number 4, and this is the most important point the fuel cutoff switches were activated mid-flight. The pilots realized the fuel cutoff switches, which had to be on run, was on cutoff. They realized that, and then they moved the switches back from cutoff back to run. The cockpit voice recording also indicates one pilot, we don't know who, one pilot asking the other pilot, why did you cut off the fuel switches? To which the other pilot responds, no, I did not. Like I said, we don't know which pilot is asking which pilot this question, but this was certainly asked by one pilot to another. We also know that it was the junior pilot, the co-pilot, who was the pilot flying, and it was the senior pilot who was the pilot monitoring. No conclusive evidence of how the fuel cutoff switch, which should have been on run, wasn't cut off in the first place. And number 7, both engines dropped below the idle speed, and that's why they were not able to generate enough power to keep the aircraft going. The flight data recorder was also damaged to try and get enough data to find out what exactly led to this crash. Both pilots were well rested, they were fit to fly, they were both experienced. Between the two of them, remember, they had 10,000 hours of flying between Captain Sabharwal and co-pilot Kundar. They had 10,000 hours of flying. The investigation will now examine additional evidence. The preliminary report, it's a 15-page report, it's now been submitted to the Ministry of Civil Aviation. The investigation will also examine if there is any additional evidence that is brought forth. The preliminary report simply says that their finding is that the fuel cutoff switches, which should have been in the run mode, were in the cutoff mode. The pilots realize this and then they move it back up to the run mode, but because the flight had not got enough elevation, it had not got enough altitude, therefore it didn't have enough time to reignite both the engines and thereby produce enough power and thrust to try and keep the flight going. Let's bring you up to speed with more findings. Questions are being asked about how did this happen. Remember, this has to be manually done. This is not an electronic procedure. You cannot do this remotely either. The fuel is drawn from the fuel tanks. There are pressure pumps through which the fuel is then injected into the carburetor and from the carburetor into the engines, and then the fuel pump fires up the engines. The fuel passes via the fuel filters which remove any kind of impurity. Remember, this investigation has also checked out the fuel from the Bowsers. It has examined the fuel and it has said there was no contamination in the fuel. The control unit then regulates the flow of the fuel, how much fuel at what speed goes into the engine and fires up the engine. The fuel and air is mixed. It's a combination, it's a combustible combination before it's delivered to the cylinders of the engine, which then are powered up. The fuel-air mixture produces power for the aircraft to fly. At some point in this flight, and remember this whole thing happened in just 30 seconds, this whole thing concluded in 30 seconds. At some point, the pilots realized fuel was not flowing from the tank into the engine, and that was because the fuel cutoff switch, which should have been in the run mode, was in the cutoff mode, and then they realized that, they move it back into the run mode, but they didn't have enough time. They didn't have enough time for the engines to be relit, both the engines to be relit and to continue the flight. So the big questions that we're asking, basis this preliminary investigation by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board. Number 1, there is clear confusion between the pilot and the co-pilot. One pilot is asking the other, why did you cut off the fuel switches? The other pilot replies to it by saying, no, I did not. Number 2, how was the fuel switch, the fuel cutoff switch, why was it in the cutoff position? It should have been in the run position. Remember, there are only 2 instances where this switch is manually handled. One on the ground before takeoff and the other after it lands, after landing. Why mid-flight was this moved from run to cutoff and then back from cutoff back to run again? System failure was there. One of the guests earlier was saying that there could have been an LSAT or a system failure that led to this fuel cutoff. We'll have to explore that. Did Boeing or Air India ignore any FAA advisories? There was an FAA advisory back in 2018. It was a non-mandatory advisory, but it certainly did say that there was some faulty mechanism which automatically led to this fuel cutoff, and that airliners should pay attention to this. It was, like I said, it was non-mandatory on the airliners. Number 5, what additional proof will the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board examine to try and come to the exact conclusion as to why Air India Flight 171 crashed? For now, what the report says is that the fuel cutoff switch, which had to be in run position, was in cutoff position, and the pilot and the co-pilot realized this by the 4th or 5th second after takeoff, and then right after that they move it back into the run position. By the time they move it back to the run position, there wasn't enough elevation on the flight, there wasn't enough altitude on the flight, there wasn't enough power on the flight for both the engines to be relit and for the flight to continue. Arunima is here in our studios. Anvit tracks the Ministry of Civil Aviation for us. Arunima, of course, was tracking this right from day one on June the 12th when the air crash happened just off the perimeter wall of the Ahmedabad Airport. Arunima, explain this in simple language for our viewers. What is this fuel cutoff switch? Why was it in the cutoff position? And can this be done remotely, electronically, by somebody outside the cockpit, or does this necessarily have to have manual intervention?
So the fuel cutoff switch are two switches which are aided by springs. Maybe we can pull out that picture which we have and put it on air to show to our viewers as well. There are two switches. If you take them up, it means you are in the run position, and if you are keeping them stable, which means that fuel supply is continuing. In this case, it looks like what AAIB has found out, that there was the fuel switches taken. These are the two switches taken to the cutoff position. You see cutoff written below that, so it has been taken to the cutoff position. Taking it to the cutoff position means that engine is no longer getting any fuel, which means loss of power, loss of thrust, and preliminary report seems to suggest that this is the reason why this aircraft crashed. Now, was this problem with the switch right from the start? I just want to go through the timeline that has been given in the AAIB report. At 7:56, and this is all UTC time that is being given, the taxiing of the aircraft begins. At 8:07, the aircraft is rolling. By 8:08, 42 seconds past that, it has hit the maximum speed limit, which means that till this point the engine has enough power, which makes me conclude that the fuel switch is in its fine position, it's in the run position, and fuel is still going to the engine. What happened then suddenly at 8:08:56? This is when pilots realize that there's something wrong, and
But 8:08:56 is after takeoff. They've
after
taken
takeoff,
off.
yes. 8:08:42 is when the maximum speed has been achieved, and which means they have taken off. It's at some point between this 42 and 56 that they realize that it has to be taken to the run position. The switch is in cutoff position. At 8:08:56, the second engine's fuel switch is also moved to the run position. But by then, I think the damage is already done, because relitting takes time. The engines take time after they have been cut off to once again get their power. At 8:09, 5 seconds past that fraction of second, the mayday call has been given, and at 8:09:11, the EAFR has stopped recording, which means it is at this point that the flight has crashed. So something has happened between 8:08:42 when the maximum speed was achieved, and 8:09 past, and 11 seconds past that.
And I just want to be clear for our viewers, this cannot be done remotely, this cannot be done electronically, this has to be done manually, where the fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run or run to cutoff.
Yes, and if this was a mechanical failure, then what the final page of this report says. It's a 15-page report. In the final page, it says that GE, which is the engine manufacturer, and Boeing, which owned the Dreamliner, none of them have been asked to carry out any further investigation for mechanical issues. So if a mechanical issue was found in this entire probe as to why did it come to the cutoff position, ideally GE or Boeing would have been asked to carry out some tests, but that has not happened. So it's a big mystery as to how this happened, that these two critical switches went into the cutoff mode.
Let me go across to Anvit Srivastava as well before we go to our guests. Anvit, where's the minister? Where are the members of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board? They were assisted, of course, by the NTSB, by the FAA, by representatives from Boeing and Air India. I believe both Boeing and Air India have put out statements initially after this report was made public. What is the latest that you have?
Yeah, Zaka, the minister has been travelling, and we tried to re-establish contact with him, and his team had said that he will be talking to us later. And there are also statements from other stakeholders, be it Air India and Boeing, and they've all said that they have assisted in the investigation, and they'll be continuing to do so. But at this stage in investigation, these are the preliminary findings that have been put out by the AIB. But all the stakeholders are still in contact with AIB, because a detailed report will follow. Now, these are the preliminary findings which hint towards the towards the main focus of the investigation being the fuel engine fuel switches. See some details that this report has raised some questions as to that, because see, we have previously seen that RAT was also deployed, and the time has also been mentioned at what time was the RAT deployed, the ram air turbine. But we need to understand also that whether how much fuel was in the engines to allowing it to take off, and then RAT deploys, and then the fuel supply is cut off, leading to the plane to plunge and to not allowing it to rise in altitude. So these are the details that we are looking forward to as the detailed report will come out. Also, the investigators have focused on the switch, talking about how the pilots had had a conversation between them, but it is not mentioned as to which pilot is speaking to which pilot. So whether it was the pilot in command who was holding the flight in control at that point in time, or was it the first officer. So those details are also yet to follow, but it is clear that the fuel supply was of the engines were cut off, and that is the reason that had led to this crash. But some more details will also emerge, as they have gone on to say that at this time no recommendations have been made to the engine manufacturer or to the aircraft owners. But in time to come, yes, certainly when the detailed report comes out and more details are found as to what led to this exact cutting off the power and the transitioning from run to cut off, and then attempts were made by the pilot to bring it and reignite the engines. But since like Arunima mentioned, the altitude was not enough to make and to allow that time to the pilots. So those details, we are awaiting those details, and we are expecting that the detailed report that AIB will put on, and which also will be shared with the ICAO, that will certainly clear these doubts.
All right, Amrit, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you as and when there are further updates. I believe the minister is traveling to his constituency. We have a reporter there as well. We will also be tracking the Civil Aviation MOS, who is in Pune. So we have a reporter there as well. So the moment they make any comments, we will bring it to you. Let's also go across to our guests. Air Marshal Retired Sanjeev Kapoor is former DG Inspection and Safety of the Indian Air Force. KVJ Rao is former cabin crew of Air India. Mark D. Martin is CEO of Martin Consulting. Mr. Martin, I'm sorry I had to cut you off in the last wheel, but the sequence of events after takeoff, 0 seconds, the takeoff happens, the aircraft lifts off. 3 seconds after takeoff, which Arunima was also referring to, at 8:08:42 is when it hits the maximum speed of 180 knots. 4 seconds after takeoff, engine 1's fuel switch is cut off. 5 seconds after takeoff, engine 2 fuel switch is cut off. 8 seconds after takeoff, the RAT is deployed, because the RAT is a mechanism in the Boeing 787 which gets deployed when there's a dual engine failure. So within 10 seconds of takeoff, both pilots realize that there is a dual engine failure. 13 seconds after takeoff, they try to push it back from cutoff position to run position, the fuel control switches. This is for engine 1, and then 17 seconds after takeoff, they try to push the second engine, the second fuel control switch, from cutoff to run. But because, as everybody has been saying, this flight hadn't got enough lift, hadn't got enough power, it just sort of papers off and then crashes outside the perimeter wall. What are the questions that stand out for you, Mr. Martin, after this preliminary report?
So Zaka, it's almost deja vu. I remember 15 years ago, you and I were talking about Air India Mangalore crash when you were over at Headlines Today. So I'm just going to fast forward. The RAT only gets deployed when you have a total failure and an emergency situation. It's an auto logic in the 787, on the 320, on all aircraft. Now, if the RAT is deployed, RAT never deploys if the switches have gone over to cutoff. Okay, switches going off or going over to cutoff does not mean RAT deploys. RAT deploys because it's an auto sensor that everything is failed on board. That's the first thing. So the word is engine failure, and if engine failure occurred, dual engine failure, then the RAT deploys. That's the first fact on this whole thing. The second is, assuming that the fuel cutoff switches had a problem, assuming many a times, Zaka, I'll tell you, OEMs issue a service bulletin, not a advisory circular or not an AD, because they just want to keep it subtle and just inform everybody, and they pass the responsibility back onto the airline and the operator. Now, if the fuel cutoff switches went back, and even if you turn it back and you turned it on, there's no chance you're going to get the kind of takeoff thrust in 3 seconds. You're at 800 feet, you're dropping like a rock, 180 knots, your speed is reducing, all your attention is in your forward cockpit instruments. There's absolutely no way your hand would ever go back. That's the second part I'm going to say. The third part is that even if you had an engine failure, and let's assume the procedure was to recycle the fuel switch, the fuel valve, that even in that it takes almost 3 to 4 minutes to start again. So the first point we need to understand, and we need to be very, very clear, is that this is an initial report.
Correct.
There's a lot more work that needs to be done. No stone should be left unturned, Zaka, and I'll tell you why. Because why on earth would a mechanical switch go from run to cut off? Now, I got to be clear, as an investigator, and I'm sure everybody on your panel, including Air Marshal, will say this, when a rat gets deployed, there's extreme vibration on board the aircraft. I don't know if it's happened to me. A rat gets deployed and there's vibration. Now, my logical understanding as an aviation guy and a pilot would suggest that vibration let the engine switches to go, because it's obviously a wear and tear mechanical device. Now, granted, there was an SP which came out in 2018 that warned everybody to inspect it. Maybe they did not inspect it. Maybe they should have changed it, replaced it. We don't know. But if a mechanical switch with a spring, you could actually got to pick it up and put it into place. It's a gate, and in that, if it went back, then clearly it could either be because of extreme vibration, or something which is triggered, or that mechanism has been overused, or the metal frame or the gate has been worn out. These are the 3 or 4 plausible reasons. But again, guys, Zaka, you and I have spoken about crashes, sadly, nearly 4 or 5 times in the last 15 years, right? And my request is, let that full investigation get out.
Absolutely.
Because now, let's not speculate. We can come up to our own theories, which is good. And I think, this is not a pilot issue, because why on earth would the pilot pull the switches back at 800 feet and kill himself and kill 260 people on board? Okay. Something has triggered that. And as you guys have rightly pointed out, that is the crucial bit. And we need to go back and ask why? And that's what will establish.
That's a fair point. Like I said, this whole exercise is not about finger pointing or blaming someone or blaming the pilot and the co-pilot. No, I mean, something went abysmally wrong on board Air India Flight 171. We have to find out what that was. And this preliminary report is just a 15-page report, and these final reports take probably years. I remember the 2020 air crash that happened in Kozhikode. It took a whole year for it.
I remember it took almost 4 years. Remember, Zaka? Exactly. We spoke about it in June 2010. It took 4 years to get out.
For it to come, Arunima wants to make a point on this.
Just one point. This point about vibration, that possibly some vibration happened. On that point alone, let's bring in what the sole survivor of the air crash has told investigators. The sequence of event, as he describes it, is that the flight takes off, and suddenly he says it feels like it has gone in a limbo. It's not moving forward, it's not going back, and then the lights come off, and then suddenly the aircraft accelerates, and then it drops dead. The crash happens. So at no point is he mentioning any kind of vibration or any external factor that he could take note of, which could have led to this kind of a situation.
Also, I mean, one basic question is, if there was, as you said, some vibration that led to automatically the switch going from run to cut off, and the pilots, by the time they realized it was too late, wouldn't this report also say that we've asked GE, the engine manufacturer, we've asked Boeing, the manufacturer of the aircraft, to look into this possibility?
So the flight data recorder data is binary, Zaka. It just shows 0 or 1. Okay. 1 is on, 0 is off, or it might show 2, 3 as part of a setting. It's digital. And this DFDR is one of the most advanced in the world, because the 787 also has a cockpit camera. Okay, so a cockpit camera is installed on a 787, and that cockpit camera records all action. So it's a surprise to me as to why did the enhanced airborne flight recorder, why doesn't the report talk about the cockpit camera footage? Where is the cockpit camera footage? Because that will reveal everything. This aircraft has got a cockpit camera which focuses on the cockpit. It's got a galley camera. It's got a left camera which also captures pilot actions. It's an advanced flight data recorder. And my question is, we want to see that video footage of the cockpit camera, because that will tell us precisely what happened. Also, we have to be very clear that from time of takeoff, we were just talking about 20 seconds to crash.
Correct.
At 20 seconds to crash, these are micro steps and milestones which have occurred in this incident. RAT will only deploy when you've lost everything: hydraulics, pneumatics, engine, electrical power, all gone. That's your last resort. You're flying on something called an essential power bus, which, Zaka, is a battery that sits below your chair, your seat, and your hydraulic electrical power from the RAT. That's it. Everything has failed. You're down to the last straw. Now, in that situation, if somebody looked back and saw that the switches were, first up, ask me honestly, there's no chance in hell the switches can go back miraculously or by, divine intervention. Okay. And second of all, if it went back, then there's something wrong with the switches and that mechanical device. Maybe it's worn out and no maintenance guy from Air India chose to even bother to check it. And the third is
Mr.
RAT deploying is the biggest evidence.
Well, I want to shift focus again back to these fuel control switches. What are these switches? What do they do? And why are they critical, at least as per the initial findings of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board? Now, the fuel control switches, there are two. They control the flow of the fuel, the aviation turbine fuel, from the fuel tank through the chambers into the engine, and then of course the engine, the fuel powers the engine to get lift and power and thrust. So these are basically, on the cockpit. It's right next to both the pilot and the co-pilot. There are two separately for both the engines. When they're placed down, they are in the cutoff position. When they're placed down, you can see cutoff written here. So if they're placed down, they're in the cutoff position, which means that it is restricting the flow of fuel from the tank into the engine. This, remember, there is this sort of metal constrictor. This metal constrictor that you can see, this whole gear itself is spring loaded. There is a spring that is attached to this. So basically what the pilot or the co-pilot, as the case may be, pilot flying or pilot monitoring, will have to lift this because it's spring loaded. He has to lift this and then move it past this metal constrictor, move it past to the run position. Similar, when you do the opposite action, from run to cutoff, you have to lift this flap, take it over this metal constrictor, and then put it down to cutoff. It's a manual action. You have to lift, pull up or pull down, and then release. That's how it's done. And it cannot be done, like I said, either electronically, it cannot be done remotely, it cannot be done by anyone outside the cockpit. It's purely manual action. Now here what happened is, and mind you, in most flights, and we'll have, we'll go across to Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor as well. In most flights, this switch is never touched. It's only touched twice, either at the time of takeoff or before takeoff, or it is touched after landing. At no point through the course of the flight are these switches touched because if they're touched, then it cuts off the fuel supply into the engine, thereby the engine then loses power. Let me ask Air Marshal Kapoor this. I mean, this is what the report says. The report says that at the fourth second or the fifth second after takeoff, the pilots realize that the switch, the fuel control switch, was in the cutoff position. What can plausibly explain that? Because if it was in the cutoff position, how did it get power to taxi all the way and to take off? I mean, you need the fuel to go into the engines for that duration, about 14-15 seconds it took for the taxiing and for it to take off. And then suddenly the fourth or fifth second after takeoff, they realize that the fuel control switch is in the cutoff position.
Yeah, whatever aviation sense and knowledge I have, and having read and seen this accident, and I have handled a large number of accident investigations in Air Force. And Air Force is the only agency in this country which conducts a regulated accident investigation course in which the civil aviation people also come and learn from us. Now, coming specifically to your question, there was a similar incident on 787 in Nippon Airways in Japan in 2019, January, when after landing 787 Dreamliners, when the pilots operated the thrust reversals, both the engines got cut off. Now, this is recorded. The aircraft had fortunately landed, it rolled, and thereafter it was towed outside. They did a lot of research. So 2019 onwards, 2018, there's an FAA advisory. Yeah. 2019 on similar, the engines, both the engines just cut off in 2019 in Japanese Nippon Airways. Now, coming specifically to this accident, in my appreciation, it is not possible that before takeoff or during any condition, the fuel valves would have been shut, because the aircraft would not be generating that kind of thrust and power for it to get airborne. Now it is a hot afternoon 1:30 or 2 local time. Temperatures must be, tarmac temperatures must be around 45 plus degrees centigrades. The aircraft is fully loaded, 100 plus 105, 10 tons of fuel with full load of passengers. The pilots should be busy flying and looking ahead, because Ahmedabad is a runway with a lot of bird activity, and generally having flown there, you're always on your edge to see where the takeoff path in the funnel is clear. Now, at this stage, something has happened at unstick. The most important, Zaka, in my appreciation, in what piece we are missing out is the pilot has given a mayday call. Why would a pilot give a mayday call at unstick? It means he has experienced loss of thrust on both the engines. This one engine itself is capable of taking this aircraft up and away. So he has lost both the engines, and the 787 manual, I just tweeted this morning, indicates very clearly in case you have two engine failures, which generally happens when you fly over volcanic ash or other conditions, because two engine failure on a two engine aircraft is extreme rarity. And the pilots are only made to do this exercise in a simulator in 1 in a million case when both the engine fails in an airline and of this high-tech platform.
Zaka, can I step in? Can I say something?
Just 1 second. I have to take a break. Captain Ross Eimer is also joining us as a retired United Airlines pilot. We'll go across to all our guests in just 1 second. But just on the meteorological question that Marshal Kapoor raised, this is there in the AIB's report, the preliminary report. Point number 8 is meteorological information. It says at 7:30, it was at 36 degrees, not significant. At 0800, it is at 37 degrees, again not significant. 0830, it is again at 37 degrees, not significant. 0900, it is at 38 degrees, it says not significant. That's what the report says. Now, whether or not that was a reason, we don't know, but the report says that the meteorological activity, the heat or the climate activity, was not a significant factor that led to the crash. Let me take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue a conversation on the preliminary report of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, which looked into what caused the crash of Air India 171.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
One thing is very clear in the AIB report, that the fuel control switch had been turned off. It was in cut-off position, which means that fuel was not reaching between engines, and that perhaps led to loss of power, loss of thrust. So is this an occurrence which is happening for the first time? There is an answer to it in the report. If you look at the report, it says that the FAA issued Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin in December 2018. And this bulletin was exactly about this kind of a situation. It spoke about potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. Does the fuel control switch in Boeing 737 lock or unlock itself on its own? This is what the advisory was all about back in December 2018. The SAIB was issued based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the lock.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage on the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board's preliminary report. It's a 15-page report that went into the details of what caused the crash of Air India Flight 171 on the 12th of June from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. And the preliminary report seems to indicate that it was a dual engine failure. Fuel flow was cut off to both the engines. That's because the fuel control switch, those switches that you see on the panel that's there for the pilot and the co-pilot, the fuel control switch, which should have been in the run position, was in the cutoff position. The pilot and the co-pilot realized that there is an apparent confusion that happens between the two pilots. One pilot is heard asking the other, they've not been identified which pilot asked which, but one pilot is heard asking the other, why did you cut off the fuel switch? To which the other pilot responds by saying, no, I did not. So let me go across to Captain Ross Imer, who's a retired United Airlines pilot and the CEO of Aero Consulting Experts. What plausible explanation is there for these fuel control switches to be in the cutoff position and not in the run position during the first few seconds of this flight?
There's no reason I can think of that dictates those two switches could be off. I listened to earlier part of your conversation and you were actually correct. The only way you could turn those engines off at this time is by reaching out and going over the gate. These switches are designed to be foolproof. Boeing engineers, thousands of them, they went over and over and made sure that you cannot bump these switches. It's impossible. Someone physically would have had to, as you mentioned, lift the switch out of the gate, over it, and turn it off. So it's actually very interesting that what you just said, one pilot realizes that both of those switches are in the cutoff position and inquires about it. Says, why did you do that? And the other pilot, there's only two pilots, by the way, in this flight, which brings another subject that if there was time, I would like to mention that. And he says that I didn't do it. So who did? This is very interesting to me. About 2 weeks ago, I reached up to the head of the Airline Pilot Association, and I mentioned to him that this flight was being operated by only two pilots, and it's a 10-hour flight. In US, we have a regulation that you cannot operate any flight over 8 hours with only two pilots. I'm not saying that a third pilot could have saved this flight, but at least there would have been somebody to see one of the crew members is reaching out for these two switches and putting him in the off position.
Okay, just give me a moment, Captain Ross. I'm going to come back to you. Just 1 second. Let me bring you up to speed. This whole thing happens in 30 seconds flat between takeoff and then the crash. It's just 30 seconds, and you know, we are human beings at the end of the day. So are the pilot and the co-pilot. So they have 30 seconds to realize what's going on and to take corrective action. And unfortunately, a lot of people have been saying this from day one. If this flight had reached 1,000 feet altitude, then it wouldn't have crashed. They would have got enough time, enough thrust, enough lift to ensure that the rat had been deployed, and the rat gives you enough sort of elbow room for the captain to then maneuver the flight and try and land it safely if he can. But this happened within the first few seconds of takeoff, that they realized that the fuel control switches are in the cutoff position and not in the run position. And as Captain Ross said a moment ago, there is also the cockpit voice recorder recording that's been included as part of this AIB report, where one pilot is asking the other pilot, why did you cut off the fuel switches? To which the other pilot responds, no, I did not. Let's take a closer look at those harrowing 30 seconds which led to this tragic crash of Air India Flight 171. The aircraft lifts off from the runway, it taxis, it lifts off just 3 seconds after it takes off, and the aircraft reaches the maximum speed of 180 knots. This is at 08:08:42 UTC, as has been recorded by the AAIB. So at 08:08:42, the aircraft reaches the maximum speed of 180 knots. At this point, this is the 4th second after takeoff, the first fuel cutoff switch for engine 1 is moved to cutoff position from the run position. It was in the run position because otherwise it would not have taxied, it would not have got enough power to be airborne in the first place. It was moved from run to cutoff position 4 seconds after takeoff. The 5th second, which is 1 second later, the fuel cutoff switch for engine 2 also is switched from run to cutoff. Now this has to be manually done. This cannot be done electronically, remotely, from the outside. No, it has to happen inside the cockpit, and it has to happen manually. 8 seconds after liftoff, the engines, both the engines lose power. It's a dual engine failure because the fuel is not moving to either engine. They don't have enough fuel to keep this engine powered on and give this aircraft lift and power and thrust. It loses power. Because it's a dual engine failure, then the RAT kicks in. The RAT is the Ram Aviation term.